As you know, we have been guests in this special location because the director, Mr. Sgalla, thought that this would have been a very good occasion also for you to know the place and to know that there is a library that is open where you can register and you can come to study. There are a couple of rooms where you can study there. So it has been distributed one formulary just to leave your name and to be informed of all the activities that are taking place in the center during the month. There are a lot of events, a lot of presentation, a lot of discussions, and all of them are free. So whenever you like to join, just you can come. And I think it's a good place where you may also find a lot of books when you do research, when you have to do certain type of report or whatever. Dr. Sgalla is the person that allowed us to do all this day of work in the Centro Studi Americani. He is the director since a few months, and I want to thank him and give him the floor to say a few words just to explain to you how you can take advantage of this particular place.
Grazie. Mi rivolgo nella lingua italiana per evitare magari qualche errore. Io vi ringrazio di questa settimana che avete trascorso qui. Per noi è stato un piacere ospitarvi e vi chiediamo una cortesia. Vi abbiamo distribuito questi manifesti, questi manifestini. Se per cortesia ce li restituite compilati con la vostra mail, con la vostra email, perché vorremmo inserirvi nella nostra mail list e così farvi partecipi delle attività del centro anche successivamente. Quindi alla fine di questa sessione le ragazze ritireranno questo documento e così diventerete parte integrante della vita del Centro Studi Americani. Grazie e buon lavoro.
Grazie ancora. Well, take advantage of this opportunity, because whenever you are in the center of Rome and you need a place to stay, to connect to internet or do a research, this is a space open to all of you. Well, this is the last event of the 12th edition of the Diplomacy Festival. You have been a protagonist of many of these events. And as you see, as you have been already watching the previous event, it was dedicated to cyber attack, to espionage, to all the criminal activities that are now growing on the web. Well, we continue on this specific issue, and the theme of today, it's a theme that has to do with the pandemic and criminal organization. I will introduce you our panelists. It's a very special panel, and I hope that you will appreciate it. We have Stefano Delfini, that is director of the criminal analysis in the Central Police, Criminal Police of Italy. Then we have we have here in Rome Professor Ranieri Razzante, that is professor of anti-money laundering legislation, University of Bologna, is professor of economic law, University of Cassino, and director of the Research Center on Security and Terrorism. You already had the possibility to hear him last week. And then we have connected from Washington, Professor Paul Angelo, that is a Council of Foreign Relations and a Fellow for Latin America Studies. The idea of this event, it came to me once when I wrote his article on foreign affairs. So that's the reason why we invited you, because your article was very interesting. Finally, last but not least, Giovanni Tartaglia Polcini is a judge, but he's also a legal advisor at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Directorate General for Global Affairs, chairs of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group, and also director of a special multilateral project that is called El Pacto with Latin America, and he will tell you what it's about. Well, the concept that I got from the article and also from other reports that have been published lately have shown a very strong capacity of resilience in the criminal organization. They are able to adapt to mutuated social, political, and economic conditions. They adapt to scenarios that are created by changes that are independent from their activities. Globalization has, in a certain way, created new scenarios of activity for the criminal gang in the World Wide Web. And lately, the health situation due to the pandemic and the economic crisis that was related to pandemic has given other space for licit or apparently licit and illicit activities by this gang. Well, the field, the main areas of interest for this criminal organization are, generally speaking, three: new opportunities and market, the infiltration in the legal economy, and third, reaffirm the control exercised over the territory. So these are more or less the three areas that we are covering today. I would start with the first question to Dr. Stefano Delfini, that I remind you is director of the criminal analysis of the Italian police. The question that I would like to pose to you, Dr. Delfini, is this: what are these new scenarios that the organized crime are exploiting after the pandemic? Please.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Let me just introduce my office in a few minutes. I'm an officer of Polizia di Stato, the Italian State Police, but I work in an office with colleagues of Carabinieri, Guardia di Finanza, and Polizia Penitenziaria, the four police forces that work here in Italy. So we work in this hub called the Crime Analysis Service, and we work in the Public Security Department of the Ministry of the Interior, and we are a hub for the Interforce Strategic Analysis of criminal phenomena. Criminal phenomena historical, just like mafia-style organized groups, or emerging phenomena, just like other robberies or other gender violence. The service is a support for the actions of the Minister and of the police forces. Our core business is the analysis of possible threat scenarios evolution and the consequent counter strategies to adopt. We also do an interpretation of the data extracted from our Interforce database with every news from the police forces and the reports of the operation conducted by the police forces in Italy and in other countries. Now, answering your question, I can confirm that the complex situation the country has faced and is still facing in relation to the pandemic is a scenario of absolute interest for organized crime groups, which has shown over time great adaptability to the changes in the socio-economic context, with the objective to find new opportunities to invest its considerable financial resources deriving from its traditional illicit trafficking activities, first of all, drugs. Our studies have shown that since the beginning of the pandemic crisis, the service and the health sectors have been particularly affected by the acquisition by criminal groups having huge amounts of liquidity in their possession in a moment where the liquidity of people and of entrepreneurs were very, very poor. During the pandemic period, prevention and countering activities conducted by the police forces targeted not only the sectors most affected by the economic crisis, such as retail, tourism, transport, entertainment sectors, but also those which became particularly attractive due to the protraction of the pandemic, related to the request for medicines, healthcare products, use of e-commerce, food retail, cleaning and funeral activities, being deeply exposed both to criminal control and to the counterfeiting of products offered for sale on parallel markets or through the darknet. The analysis of the information collected during investigation makes it possible to state that extortion still represents a widespread phenomenon, although there have been responses from entrepreneurs, and that infiltration into the contract and subcontract sector is the most advanced form of influence on the productive economic fabric. I would like to illustrate the actions of the Department of Public Security as started, coinciding with the outbreak of the pandemic in our country, in order to prevent the risk that criminal groups could take advantage. In this perspective, the Chief of Police set up in April 2020 a permanent monitoring and analysis center on the risk of infiltration into the economy by mafia-type organized crime, chaired by the Central Director of Criminal Police. This is an interforce structure with the mission to anticipate any initiative of pollution of the economic fabric and conditioning of public decision-making processes in relation to the award of contracts undertaken by organized crime. In particular, the strategies adopted by the mafia-type organization to acquire companies in difficulty, penetrate the economic and financial circuits, condition public procurement, and more, are analyzed within the permanent body. We had the contribution offered by the various stakeholders like Confcommercio, Confindustria, Confartigianato, etc., considered in order to understand the specific problems and critical issues of the sectors represented. To date, the activity of this permanent center has made it possible to produce 5 analysis reports that you can find on the website of the Minister of Interni in the Italian language, but I want to let you, if you are interested, one copy in English language and another document that we are product in English language too. So in this report, I want to be very short. We made the focus on criminal welfare that we call criminal welfare of proximity by criminal groups, initiative of closeness and support to families in difficulty by mafia groups. I want to make an example. In a district of Palermo, very popular, called Zen, in April 2020, in full lockdown, mafia groups offered generous shopping bags and essential items to the poorest classes, just to control the territory, because the first objective of mafia groups is to control the territory. In the second report, we talked about new financial dynamics of organized crime, and for example, the theme of non-performing loans of companies affecting banking assets. In the third report, the trend of the impact of pandemic on trend of crime, the different crime. For example, we had more internet crimes and less crimes against the person or against property. Then we, in another report, we underlined the outcomes of the activities carried out by police forces about the risk of infiltration into the economy. In the last report, we made a focus on the analysis of corporate changes recorded in Italy, with a specific focus on companies with corporate changes banned in the same period, banned just with a act of the prefect called interdittiva, that is useful to avoid that that entrepreneur can have a contract with the public administration, and so to have public money. Police forces are investigating and have started an accurate control plan in order to prevent criminal organizations from taking possession of the funds that will be made available by the European Commission, the Next Generation EU. Ending just my speech, I would like to remember that there is an ever increasing need for international cooperation between police forces in order to counter global threats, because we are facing a global threat far beyond national borders, and we are deeply convinced that the Italian system has all the instruments to successfully face this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I want to point out two elements, just to give you 2 bullet points. Imagine that in Rome, the rumor is that at least 50 between hotels and restaurants have been sold during the pandemic, and they are under investigation because of these sales that were done at the lower price of market. Then another aspect that Dr. Delfini was pointing out is the European funds. There is a great risk that through this infiltration in the legal system, in the legal activities with companies that have been sold because of lack of resources, the criminal organization may try to get a slice of the big cake that is arriving with the European fund for the recovery. So these are 2 elements that the police is investigating very strictly. But now, just because we're talking about the relation between the criminal gang and the public administration, and also the legal structure, sometimes consultant, sometimes lawyer firm, we need to be careful also about the corruption that may be behind this criminal activity. So I would like to ask to Professor Ranieri Razzante, that is also professor of anti-money laundering legislation and also director of Research Center on Security and Terrorism. What are the risks that we are facing that this big amount of money that is arriving will be in a certain way fueling and also finishing in the pocket of the criminal gang?
Hello, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm afraid I'm out of this panel because my English is not so fluent, and so I'm sorry, but I didn't know that we have to speak English. I try, and you correct me. Okay, my friend Giovanni will support my bad English. Last week we spoke Italian, and you remember we spoke about cybersecurity. Yesterday, in my interview at the Enne Kronos, I spoke about the cyber attack at CIA. You remember I'm the counselor of the Minister of Defense on this matter. And I said that this is a new terrorism. I hope my friends and Giovanni agree with this idea. There is a new terrorism, form of terrorism. Cyber laundering is the new way for cryptocurrencies and for financial operations. This is the new frontier, is the right frontier, okay? This is the new frontier. This is the very challenge we have to face, because this is not the new economy. Mafia and terrorists use the new economy. There are 20 years, but 10 years, I'm sure. We have 10 years, we are 10 years later. Cyber laundering is, I think, the 2 or 3% of the global PIL. This is a stima per difetto, okay? A number estimation, a lower estimation. Most of this cyber laundering we can find, if we succeed, find in Wall Street and the other public markets. Not in your banks, not in Matthew's banks. Money that is not digital money is for and are for terrorists and mafia unuseful. Unuseful. If we think that mafia and terrorists, we can find our police that is the best police, all the police, best police in the world, and our intelligence the best in the world. We can think that they are going to trace money in your bags. This is out of our mind, and you have you don't think so. Shadow banking and internet is and are the new forms of changing money. Credit cards are the oldest now. Our governments, Italian governments, in the recent past, and probably this government too, are evaluating the possibility to a remake to cashback of the cashback. The cashback is not for mafia. Cashback is not for terrorists. Cashback is for mom, dad, uncles that go to a pub, go to a dress shop and buy. Mafia and terrorists, I'm speaking bad now, we are talking about now, under our seats and in the dark web. As I said yesterday in this interview, $20, $30, I can buy a complete identity of Ranieri Razzante. All the data stolen and stolen. All the data stolen. I'm so tired yesterday, another conference and so on. Yesterday, 30 years, our Ross, Carabinieri, I was a panelist yesterday. Italia, Ross, Polizia, Guardia di Finanza, my idols, okay? And they have to be your idols. No way, no matter. And the last concept, if I can. We don't know how the money laundering is easy. And is easy in the meantime, because I remember in the dark web, $20, $30 in Bitcoin, I have a new identity. I'm Ranieri Razzante. In 5 minutes, I'm Giovanni Tartaglia Bolcini. I'm very beautiful, but that's not a problem. There's no question on this. But
you don't buy that.
No, you don't buy it. Absolutely. I have a photo I will send you. More. Photo of credit cards, number of credit cards code, $20. $10. Our center, my researcher.
Is this the head of criminal gang, big criminal organization, or small ones?
Small and big. The attack on CIA and the cyber attacks now are the most useful pubblicità. No, pubblicità. Advertising for crime organization. Because Ranieri is so teached and so skilled to perform a cyber attack. And Giovanni asked me my
Can you help me?
help and scusate, consulenza. Consulting on my skills. So he paid me for a cyber attack. These gangs are of 2 types we think, and I study. On a large way, I think that we have mafia and terrorist organizations. And then there is a franchising, a sort of franchising of small organization, and they can buy each of us that is skilled on the web, not me, absolutely, to perform an attack. This is the new way of the money.
You are telling us that there is a new world of services over there.
Yes.
That is very attractive.
A placement for them.
Okay,
new jobs.
Then the criminality is not obliged to send people to learn, but they can acquire and they can borrow and they can also contract external services, outsourcing of their criminal activities.
Yes, and if you want,
okay.
then I can buy you and for my crime.
Thank you. This gives us another way to look at the criminal organization. Before we knew that they were sending their youth to the university to learn how to become economists, to become manager, in order to use them after to handle it, to manage the company that they were acquiring. Now we know that they may use specialists internally, but they also can outsource. But let's go back to the territory and to what means the presence of great criminal organization in countries that have been under attack for so many years. And we are talking now about Latin America. And Professor Paul Angelo is a specialist on this. And I would like you to elaborate and to tell us what has been the result of your studies.
Yeah, thank you so much. The article that I published in Foreign Affairs was in the early months of the pandemic, and there was a lot of curiosity and even perhaps some optimism at that stage of the game that the COVID-19 pandemic would allow governments across Latin America and the Caribbean to improve their services delivery to populations, to include security services. However, in the last year and a half, we've seen that in Latin America and the Caribbean, the pandemic has really only served to reveal gaps in governance and state capacity. Latin America represents a mere 8% of the world's population, but is home to some 20% of the world's known COVID cases, and has been affected to a significant degree by COVID deaths. In fact, 30% of the world's known COVID deaths occurred in Latin America and the Caribbean, revealing the systematic underfunding of public health across the region. It's also the region of the world that experienced the largest GDP contraction during 2020, thrusting 22 million people back below the poverty line and putting 34 million people out of work. Unfortunately, these circumstances and these conditions in the region have really played into the hands of organized crime. And I would say that organized crime has been one of the big winners of the pandemic in Latin America and the Caribbean. I think there was an initial optimism as well that closed borders and enforced lockdowns for the first months of the pandemic would have actually improved surveillance of organized crime activity, as their supply chains and movements could be more readily detected. And in those first months, we also saw a significant drop in robberies as many people were staying at home, and homicides as well, because people were ostensibly less exposed to risk because they were staying in their homes. However, military and police forces in Latin America were largely overburdened with the task of enforcing these lockdowns, which prevented them from prioritizing counter transnational organized crime operations. And after the first 3 or 4 months of the pandemic, we saw crime rates shoot up again to pre-pandemic levels. And under these circumstances, I would like to identify 3 main ways in which organized crime took advantage of the pandemic in Latin America and the Caribbean. The first pertains to the spike in unemployment and the rise in poverty, as I initially mentioned. That spike in unemployment and the initial drop in remittances from places like Europe and the United States provided fertile ground for new recruitment across the region, but especially in places like Mexico and Central America. We saw the same thing happen in the wake of the 2008 recession, when cartels and gangs oversaw a massive expansion of their territory and their size in Central America and Mexico. Over the pandemic as well, Latin America has had a really difficult time sending students back to school. In fact, 97% of the region's youth were out of school for more than a year due to pandemic restrictions. Having all of those children and youth out of school and at home or on the streets exposed them to recruitment by organized crime. And we saw a significant uptake in youth being recruited, particularly in vulnerable and marginalized neighborhoods across Latin America. In addition to being a boon for gang recruitment or organized crime recruitment in Latin America, the pandemic and the associated economic downturn led to a significant displacement of people across borders in search of work. And so we saw a movement of people, or an uptick in migration, which I think has been made all the more apparent in recent months, given the images and news headlines that are coming from the US-Mexico border, in which we've had, sort of a banner year for irregular migration to the United States, the likes of which we haven't seen since 1986. What that irregular cross-border migration did is it helped line the pocketbooks of criminal outfits, as desperate migrants and refugees paid a premium fee during border closures throughout the pandemic to get across borders. We saw this in the Northern Triangle countries of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, in which the maras, or the street gangs, were trafficking in people across borders. The Guatemala-Mexico border, of course, is an important threshold for migrants seeking to gain access to the United States to get across, and likewise the US-Mexico border. But we saw the same phenomenon in South America too, Colombia and Venezuela. We saw a lot of cross-border movement. This is a border that's been closed for the past 3 years. Just this past week has reopened for the first time. But at the beginning of the pandemic, because many Venezuelans were working in the informal economy in Colombia and they were put out of work due to movement restrictions, many of them went back to Venezuela. But as the Colombian economy reactivated and as social distancing and movement restrictions were relaxed, Venezuelans then crossed through illegal border crossings and paid organized crime outfits money to get them back into Colombia. I would also say, turning our attention to the US-Mexico border, the Trump administration's policy of remain in Mexico basically concentrated tens of thousands of migrants and refugees in tent cities on the Mexican side of the border. And those tent cities served as a staging ground for recruitment and for predatory activity. In places like Nuevo Laredo, in a single month this past year, we saw 75% of migrants reporting having been kidnapped or illegally detained or detained against their will by criminal outfits. And another 45% of respondents to a survey in Nuevo Laredo admitted to having suffered violence or rape by criminal groups. And so the predatory activity of organized crime has surged throughout the pandemic. And finally, I would just point to something that you mentioned, Giorgio, is that the cartels, gangs, and insurgent groups across Latin America filled governance voids throughout the pandemic. This is certainly not a new phenomenon in Latin America and the Caribbean, as the state has often been supplanted by criminals where state services and security provision do not reach. However, the pandemic gave criminals new opportunities to demonstrate their effectiveness at services delivery relative to the state. We saw this in Brazil, Mexico, Central America, where gangs were enforcing lockdowns, distributing masks and hand sanitizer, and providing foodstuffs to families who were struggling to get by in the absence of employment. I would also note, however, that the role of organized crime in these communities wasn't always positive. And in some places, in order to compensate for lost profits due to the reduction in extortion opportunities or the inability to get drugs to European and US markets, many of these gangs cultivated new local drug markets and preyed on youth and idle populations to get them addicted to drugs. We saw organized crime groups also prioritizing fentanyl trafficking over other kinds of drugs because of the relative ease and profitability of getting fentanyl to the US market by comparison to cocaine, let's say. But in order to make up for lost profits, many of these gangs and organized crime groups turned to diversified their activities and turned to other avenues like digital extortion, as was initially mentioned. We saw a diversification of trafficking activities over the past year as well, to include things like illegal timber, exotic and endangered animals, and unregulated gold mining. I think it's a very complicated picture that I'm painting, but nonetheless, I think it's very clear that if there was sort of an element or a subsection of society that has benefited from the chaos and horror of the COVID-19 pandemic in Latin America, the Caribbean, it's the region's insurgents, cartels, and gangs.
Thank you, Paul. I got out from your intervention that really the adaptability of the criminal gang is so high. New traffics, investing on the immigration as a market, and also in a certain way proposing itself as a state in the state with a particular type of alternative social welfare. And this is something that they also do to build an image. It's a strategy of communication to show that they are closer to people than the state that is maybe 100 kilometers away. We call it sussidiarietà in our Italian word, subsidiarity in English, I think, when the state delegates to the institution that is closer to the people certain type of services. So in this case, the state do not delegate, but they do it themselves to build an image. But now let's go to the fourth panelist, Professor Giovanni Tartaglia Pulcini. I told you he's a judge by profession, but legal advisor and also other particular responsibility in this field. We are saying, Professor Tartaglia Pulcini, that this is not a philanthropic vocation. They do not do for philanthropy. There is business, illicit business behind. And what I would like to know from you is how the international community, how multilateral organizations are trying to fight and to react to this type of new world of criminality.
First of all, I would like to thank the Festival of Diplomacy for having me invited here to this conference, and I would like also to thank the other speakers for their meaningful contributions. And it was interesting to hear a lot of interesting messages, and I hope to remain in contact with the two of them. With one, I'm a great friend, with Ranieri. We co-direct a journal, and we have a lot of possibility to share and to exchange experiences. I have the opportunity to share with you what's the actual new deal of diplomacy in this sector, and to respond to your interesting question, what is happening at the multilateral level today and preventing and fighting organized crime and corruption all around the world. If I have time at the end of my intervention, I want also to focus on Latin America, providing for the presence of my colleague, and is very skilled on this issue. On a general line, we have to ask to ourselves, what's the definition of our attention? We are speaking about organized crime, but what organized crime we are now considering? The modern organized crime is different. It shapes in a different manner in respect of the proto-mafia, of the ancient of organized crime. Giovanni Falcone, an Italian magistrate, said 40 years ago that organized crime adapts itself to the socio-economic environment of reference. And today we can speak about a new organized crime. We speak about new mafias. This kind of organized crime infiltrates the public administration through corruption and infiltrates, on the other hand, the legal economy through money laundering. You can consider a triangle. On the apex, you have organized crime. At the base, you have public administration on one hand and legal economy on the other hand. The key word is infiltration, and the instruments are corruption and money laundering. This is the holistic view of the organized crime today. It is at the base of many multilateral treaties, like the Convention of Merida, the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, the Convention of Palermo, the United Nations Convention Against Organized Crime, transnational organized crime, but also other. We have a lot of conventions, but we have also another instruments to react. It is the efficient multilateralism. And this year, Italy has the presidency of the G20. The G20 is a multilateral forum with, if I can realize, a scope of lighthouse, the future of the world, leading by example. In the G20 framework, we have an anti-corruption working group. And in this group, I'm leading today, but only because of the fact that Italy has the presidency, it is an year charge, not over 1 year. Italy has interpreted its role exactly on these issues. We have adopted, I can't now still share with you the text because we have to attend and wait the summit conclusion on 31 October to have the officiality to publish our works. But I can in advance anticipate something to you. And for instance, we have adopted a document, its title is High-Level Principles on Fighting Corruption in Time of Crisis. And we have enumerated how is the better way for a new era of enforcement in case of future crisis as the pandemic 19-1. Another document we have adopted is a set of high-level principles. They are the G20 high-level principles on corruption related to organized crime, to have a common vision of the holistic corruption and the holistic organized crime today, as I mentioned it before. We have also adopted an ambitious, innovative action plan, let's say, covering a lot of the things I have heard today here. For instance, a reference to the gatekeepers, the law firms, the so-called white collars that create the condition for leverage the threat of organized crime, facilitating the infiltration in the economy, and also through corruption in the public administration. Before closing my intervention, I try to give you also some term of reference to deepen, if you desire, these arguments in the web. Let's say just a little last thing. We have in front of us the most important challenge of our history. We have lived an unprecedented time. Probably our past generations lived something during the world wars. And now we have to recover. And how to better recovery, considering this challenge and this threat. And let me share with you just a final message. The ultimate scope of the modern organized crime is to create the basis in the young generation of a cultural tolerance of corruption. And if we consider to react to this kind of challenges only through prevention, law enforcement, repression, we probably have a lack of attention on the reality. We have to construct the consensus on the anti-corruption. We have to disseminate values, and we have to raise the awareness of young generation on these values. I think it's the new challenge for all of us. Coming at the end to the Latin American scenario and to react to what I have heard from my colleague, it is exactly the new frontier of the global fight against corruption and organized crime, because we are living a new threat. We define the grand corruption. And in some cases, this grand corruption evolves in a state captures. What I want to say is that the level of infiltration is growing. And we have a lot of examples of corruption at the higher level in the public administration, sometimes capturing entire states' governments. it is not only a Latin American issue. We have also other cases all around the world. And this is exactly the other field of our battle for future. But let's say that we have to be all confident on our future, because the G20 anti-corruption working group Italian presidency this year has result in this G20 high-level principle set, demonstrating that we have the possibility to build all together a new era of enforcement. And this is impossible without the consensus building. And the consensus building as a starring protagonist in the new generation. And the future is yours. And we are confident, I'm sure, that we, with your support, can build a better world for future. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start the question time, because I think that it's much more alive if we do this, I just wonder if the police is also having international pact or international agreement that are helping in the fight at global level.
Absolutely. First of all, we have a bilateral cooperation. We have 44 officers of police forces in 44 different states, countries, and we believe in multilateral agency. So we have in Europe the agency called Europol. And for example, Europol make an important, very important document called SOCTA, Serious and Organized Crime Threat Assessment. And in this SOCTA, with the hard work of Italian police forces, for the first time, the mafia-style organizations are considered as threats, a very important threat inside Europe. So this is a very good result for our country. And for example, in the past, one of the threats was the motorcycle gangs that are very popular in the North Europe countries. In every country there is a different sensibility about mafia, because in other countries, especially in the countries of North Europe, they think that mafia is violence. No, they have an idea of very old mafia, but in those countries the mafia use corruption, use other methods. But the Germany discovered this kind of problem in with the murder, the homicides in the Duisburg. Now in Netherlands they discover this problem with the Mokro mafia. They kill a journalist, so they have problems. Because mafia groups are not only Italian, but we have Nigerian mafia, we have Albanian mafia, Chinese mafia, Russia, Europe. So we have
But we have to say that we are not very proud that this Italian word is becoming global. No? Everybody uses it. So it's maybe after pizza, maybe it's the most used Italian word around the world. Well, let's start with some question and then we'll, please. Okay, how many? Just, we have first.
My name is Benjamin, second year student from Tor Vergata University. Thank you very much for very insightful and informative. I am from Rwanda. Rwanda. Yes. Thank you very much for the informative presentation. I have a question regarding the crime, the opportunities that COVID created for organized crime. And I wanted to ask, instead of instead of governments focusing on pursuing crimes, which they should, what are governments doing to make sure that they fulfill their functions? Because their inability, their ineffectivity to fulfill their functions have created an opportunity that organized crimes can exploit. So even though COVID has shown that, as one of the speakers mentioned, organized crimes have benefited more, did governments see COVID as also an opportunity to learn where they have been more ineffective in order to concentrate on those and thus reduce this niche that crimes are feeling more comfortable in? Okay. Thank you very much.
We take other question and then we'll have all of them answering. C'erano lì. Okay. Don't lose time.
Hello. Oh, okay. Now you all can hear me. First of all, thank you very much for all the distinguished guests. My name is Beatriz. I come from Brazil and I'm a second-year student of global governance. My question is for Mr. Paul Angelo, because in fact, coming from Latin America, from Brazil, I grew up with this presentation of many problems, many issues, a lot of, okay, this comes from this and we have this and the situation, it's really, really complex. But little I heard about solutions of it. I mean, I also understand that the situation is complex and it requires a task force for that passes for many institutions of the Latin American countries. But one of my questions, also thinking about the solutions, is how can the international organizations help to fulfill the void of the local governments in providing services and aid to the Latin American communities instead of the organized crime? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, third question.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, okay. So my name is Simone. First of all, thank to all of you for your speech. It was really good and I really appreciated it. My question was regarding recruitment in the mafia and in organized crime. So the Central American expert was talking about it, and I was wondering whether or not it would be the same, and your studies would prove the same here in Italy. I was thinking about who would have been, in a sense, more leaning towards entering these new organizations, whether it would be people that were firstly working in the black market and that were non-subsidized by the state, so nothing was given through COVID time, so the only actual alternative was mafia, and either it was for younger kids that didn't go to school, and this was a reason to abandon studies and to actually enter these organizations. Yeah, that's my question then.
You're talking about informal economy.
Yes, in a sense, who was part of this recruitment?
And,
like who was recruited?
And we're talking about countries that do not have a welfare state system that helps them in a moment of crisis. Okay, let's go with the first round of answer. Professor Angelo, Paul, you were called.
Yes, thank you. So I guess in terms of the gaps in governance that the pandemic exposed in Latin America and the Caribbean, and whether or not governments took action to identify, what were their principal gaps and rectify them, I would say that because of how dramatic the fallout from COVID-19, both in public health and economic terms, has been across the region, most governments in Latin America and the Caribbean have been in reaction mode. They're responding to a crisis, not planning proactively for the future. And so I think, if anything, this trend or this tendency has been revealed by the over-reliance on military organizations and police organizations across the region to fulfill functions that aren't traditionally associated with security forces. Across the region, you have the military and police that were called in to secure borders and enforce borders. In a place like El Salvador, President Bukele ordered the military and the police to engage in the mass detention of people who violated stay-at-home orders and did so against the Supreme Court's ruling. In other countries, you had military and police forces, particularly military forces, recalling their reservists to facilitate logistical lifts, sending ambulances and PPE across the country using military helicopters and military airlift. You saw, again, militaries setting up medical care in makeshift field hospitals. They've been at the helm of many of the national vaccination efforts across the region. And these are typically things that we would associate with public health ministries. There's not really a clearly defined role for why the military or police organization should be doing this kind of thing. I think the reliance or the excessive reliance on the military to deliver social policy is in many ways a response to budgetary restrictions in other ministries. In Latin America, militaries have big budgets, and Congress or legislatures across the region will continue to approve even larger budgets for militaries because militaries tend to be among the most popular government institutions throughout the region. But I think in the long run, this excessive reliance is going to actually come up against democratic institutionality. And so there are a lot of risks in this excessive reliance, but I don't think that almost uniformly across the board, governments have been able to respond and start building the capacity in other ministries because of resource limitations and simply because they still are in extremis. They're in panic mode. In response to Beatrice's question about how international organizations can help fill gaps, I think in terms of dismantling organized crime activity and reducing the footprint of organized crime in places like Latin America, the focus really needs to be on anti-corruption. And there are a couple of templates for anti-corruption cooperation that you can look to that have been relatively successful. And unfortunately, in recent years were dismantled because of the political prerogatives of unscrupulous politicians who were being investigated by these very institutions. And I would point to two of which were in Central America, the first being the CICIG, the UN's Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, and the OAS, the Organization of American States-sponsored MAXI, the Mission Against Corruption and Impunity in Honduras. These were both organizations, the CICIG operated for 12 years, and these organizations that accompanied public ministries or prosecutorial offices, fiscalías in Spanish, to conduct investigations into organized crime penetration into the political class in particular, and financial crimes that were being committed by public officials. And in Guatemala, we saw the investigations that were being wielded by the CICIG resulted in the dismissal of a president and vice president, and investigations and convictions in cases against former presidents in the country. All the while, throughout the CICIG's 12-year operation, the homicide rate in Guatemala almost halved because of the improvements in the provision of justice and the reduction in impunity across the board for lethal crimes. The similar effort was attempted in Honduras, as I mentioned, but as the investigations creeped in too closely to the president and his inner circle, the mandate for the MAXI was disbanded, and it never really came to fulfill its promise. But I do think that those structures and attempts to implement them elsewhere could prove to be the most important way in which the international community, international organizations can accompany governments that are trying to dismantle organized crime.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Angel. Who wants to answer?
Three questions. One of these. One of the. So we are.
Stanno sempre parlando del rapporto fra quello che la società garantisce e l'assenza, e quindi l'intervento del sostitutivo da parte delle, perché la società non migliora le condizioni.
We are so sure that we are confident mafia is a cancer for our society. Someone think that mafia is necessary, and this is the very focus point. I think Giovanni can answer so better than me. The very resistance we find in our studies, in my studies, and in my tour and conference on this matter is, but the governments allows that mafia organizations goes around and allows the penetration of mafia organizations. I think this is not true. I hate mafia's thinking, and mafia's thinking. This is my definition. Mafia's thinking I think is in a temptation that each of us can have in every day we are on this land. An example. I go in university. I have titles. I have students that wants to go around for a project, for a research project, and I prefer one or another that are my friends. This is a mafia thinking. I think I'm so direct, and I want to be diplomatic, because Giovanni is a diplomatic. I not am a diplomatic. The mafia's thinking is one of the threats. I think is Italian too. We can't delegate to the government, parliament, police, the fight against terrorism and the fight against mafia. The fight against mafia, Giovanni Falcone said, and other my idols as the policy forces in Italian police forces, that the very threat is this. Today we are contributing, me not, but we are contributing to explain to create better understanding, because I think that the understanding of the mafia phenomenon is not so clear at all.
So you say the anti-mafia starts in us. Okay. Please, who answers?
I just want to say another thing. We have to work in our country, first of all, just because mafia can be in the future not the right choice. In some towns in Italy, people don't have choice, so they necessarily has to work with mafia. So we have to give them an alternative, legal alternative, because it is the only way, I think. And it's not only a matter of police forces, of a judge or prosecutors. Is a matter of the state in his. Exactly. And I always say that we have to work just like a net all together.
Thank you. To you.
Say something also taking into due account and also providing for the information shared by by Professor Angelo to give my point of view on how, responding to the first question from the student from London, UK, what we can do to reduce the inefficiencies, and if I will understand the question, if is something on actually all around the world developing. Yes, it is. The answer mentioned by Professor Angelo, it was one of the examples of a possibility to cooperate at the level of judicial diplomacy, providing for a structured help to a country with a great threat of corruption, as was the Guatemala case with CICIG. At time I was in Guatemala, and I worked with the Fiscal General del Guatemala, Tel Maldana, and it was an historical momentum to understand the level of the infiltration and the state capture. It was an example of state capture, to be clear. And there was an investigation, if you have time to read on internet, La Linea, it was the name of this investigation. It was an example of state capture to understand the level of the infiltration of organized crime in the public administration at governmental level. The same happened in Honduras, and we were creating the basis for another action in the Triangle North of Central America, also in Salvador. But at time, we developed another modality, because we realized that we have to be innovative and transformative, looking at the long period and not only at the actuality currently results. So we created a methodology, and now this methodology is exactly considered the best practice all around the world, is considered best practice officially by the G20, is the methodology of the European Union programs in Latin America and Caribbean region. Let's provide for 3 minutes, but I think it's interesting. We have 4 levels of interventions. The first one is the capacity building level. We go to offer capability to our colleagues from police or judges, prosecutors, to give them the experience we are lived decades before in the same field. But we have realized that to offer capacity building is not enough. We need to go more in depth, because sometimes we encounter lack of organization in the state machine. So we propose to create an institutional building, a second step, after and with capacity building, institutional building. But this is not enough, because you are often in front of lack at legal framework level. So you need a law building step, a third step, technical one. Capacity building, institutional building, law building. At the end of the day, you have a fourth step. It is the consensus building I mentioned before. You have to disseminate in the society the value of the fight against organized crime to create the basis for functioning of the first three steps. But it is not an invention, and personally, it's not my invention. It is the history of the Italian anti-mafia experience. Because in Italy, to react to the mafia threats in 1992, after Capaci and after Via D'Amelio in Palermo, the entire society and collectivity and the state changed the paradigm. We created new institutions and new actors. The Directorate National Anti-Mafia, it's a model for all around the world. We created the courses and rooms to give capability to prosecutors and judges, creating a specialization on this. We have changed the law, and we have also created the basis for the consensus building. On day 25 of October, next Monday, at 5:30, we celebrate an important event. And let's say if I have the possibility to share the link, to give you the possibility to follow. The event is the celebration of the end of the first phase of the program of capacity building Falcone Borsellino. It's a flagship program of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, developed in all Latin American countries and Caribbean region, especially looking to the threat of a criminal organization today, the infiltration in procurement in Latin America, and also the cyber laundering and the cyber crime threat. And we have the Ministry of Justice of Italy, the Ministry of Interior of Italy, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Italy, the Prosecutor National Anti-Mafia, the Chief of the Police. Professor Severino is the chief of our National Administration School, and more or less about 30 ministries coming from Latin American region and Caribbean region to speak about how build together an agenda and how to exchange our experience, because we want not to impose nothing. We want not to transplant nothing. We want to share our experience and providing for also our very difficult time. We lived 40 years ago, but today the Italian perspective is different, and we can share our experience as a standard for all around the world. And we are ready to do and proud to do this in favor of all our friends in the global community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would like to close this session saying that we have seen the threats, we have seen the challenges, we have seen the possibilities to fight this criminal organization around the world. And we count on you also for what is your future in terms of your work, your job, your position when you go back to your countries, that you may take back with you what you have there today, and that you can help to change this type of substratum, this type of, let's say, milieu in French, this type of surrounding that helps mafia to grow. Thank you very much for all your effort, and see you next year. Professor Angelo, thank you very much for your contribution. And I think you and Professor Tartaglia Pulcini may start communicating, because you have a lot in common. and also the others, I will pass by your contact. Thank you very much.
Grazie mille.
Thank you.